Hello, viewers of Midwestern Marx. We are here live from Studio B. Shoot, I forgot to grab my water. 1 second, I'm going to run to the kitchen and I'm going to get water along with some vitamin C to power me through how sick I'm going to feel from talking about Steven Crowder's greasy butt. Because if I don't take vitamin C, I'm liable to just throw up while talking about Steven Crowder. Because he's so gross. But here you go. Here's a video of me wrestling someone who's now my teammate. I will be right back. 2 seconds. Promise. 2 seconds. Good morning, everyone. I'm back. I didn't throw up yet. My video lagged, of course. Very cool. Love to see it. Love to see it. I should plug my computer in, actually. Ooh, the interwebs. Good morning, everyone. How's it going? What are you doing? I wasn't doing much. So I figured it was time for a stream. Why are U.S. Protestants so weird? Protestantism isn't when you're an effing lunatic. I need some examples. I was raised in a Protestant household. A lot of them are nuts. I'm not going to disagree with you. In fact, some of them are batshit insane, and they think they're like not just normal. A lot of them think they're just like above everyone around them. Like they're following what God wants and nobody else is, based on usually like some subjective rule set that they set up. Like a lot of Protestants are super obsessed with like sexual sins, but no other sins. So they give themselves this moral superior. Like I know a lot of Protestant men who like give themselves a moral superiority when it comes, because they like waited for marriage or whatever. And then like there was a guy in my church who gave me a lecture when I was going to college, like, you know, make sure you don't engage in premarital sex. That was like all he told me. No advice about like homework or life, you know, just no premarital sex. That was all he cared about. That guy was insane. An insane Protestant. I had Adventists in mind. Oh, that guy was an evangelical. Yeah, I was raised in an evangelical church. I've had people tell me that I need to support Israel because eventually God is going to come down from the heavens and destroy Israel. But if I don't support Greater Israel and the massacre of Palestinians, then I don't support God coming back from the heavens. That's like what evangelicals believe. And then I learned what Israel's doing from a political, economic standpoint. Like, yeah, I'm not going to support that because it says to, because you guys interpreted Revelation as saying I need to. Love lag. Are we lagging? I'm sticking with my analysis that Crowder is a gay conservative who hides behind his conservative views. I mean, the guy had his pregnant wife go veggie shopping for him. I've said this before, that a lot of super homophobic people are actually like gay, and their homophobia is them projecting like their own self-hatred. I've also had people tell me, mostly people on TikTok, but I've had people say that that's a homophobic argument to make somehow. I don't even know how. People will be offended by anything, but yeah, I agree with Steven Crowder. And the whole thing that happened recently was pretty wild. I feel like it reveals a lot about the psyche of these conservative guys. Because all Steven Crowder talks about are these traditional values, monogamy, men should serve women, women should serve men, blah, blah, blah. And like, I was saying this on my personal Twitter. Like, I have some quote unquote conservative or traditional leanings in my personal life. Like, I don't want an open relationship. I don't think that works. I think it leads to like jealousy and the relationship crumbling 99.9% of the time. So I don't want that, but I don't spend all my time talking about how everybody should do the kind of marriage that I like and everybody should follow this traditional marriage. And even to Steven Crowder's point, he'll argue that the state should enforce the kind of marriage that he likes. Right? And that's his whole politics, is talking about how everyone should adhere to my traditional values and blah, 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 blah. Like, why not just adhere to them yourself? Right? If you have these traditional values that, you care about personally, just live that kind of lifestyle, live a monogamous lifestyle. But of course, as Steven Crowder is on his TV show pushing the idea that everyone needs to be in a traditional marriage and men and women need to play these specific roles and blah, 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 he's abusing his wife behind the scenes. He's being a piece of crap behind the scenes. So in his own personal life, he's not following any kind of values that would lead to a healthy and respectful marriage, while he yells at everybody else on his show for not following his values, his marriage values or whatever. And we'll watch the video. It's kind of disturbing, just FYI, to see this guy scream at his wife. And then Steven's response, I feel like, was revealing as well.
Respect, he said, then we're at an impasse. Stephen, no, we are at an impasse, okay? I love you, but Stephen, your abuse is sick. Your abuse is sick. Watch it. Fuck.
This is such a... She tells him that his abuse is sick, and he goes, watch it. Watch it. You're such a beast, Stephen. Way to bully your wife from the privacy of your own home. When I hear his wife say, watch it, I want to jump through the screen and be like, no, you watch it. You freaking man-child. What the hell are you going to do? He can't do anything to someone like me, which is why he has to go home and bully his pregnant wife like a man-child.
Watch it. I'm going to let go. I'll get what you need me to get. And I need some space. We need to just talk. Respect, he said, then we're at an impasse. No, we are at an impasse.
Discipline and respect, but only for you. I don't have to have discipline and respect. Only you. So this was released by Yashar Ali, a journalist. He posted the full video somewhere, probably on his Substack. But yeah, here it is. It was captured with a Ring camera. But it's wild. It's wild to see that anyone would treat their significant other this way, let alone somebody who goes on TV or goes on radio or goes on wherever, YouTube, every day, and tells people that they need to follow traditional values, follow the kind of marriage guidelines that were set out by God. Speaking of, we were talking about evangelical Christians earlier. Is this what God would want, Stephen? Is this what you mean when you're talking about the kind of marriage that God intended? A marriage where your wife has to serve you like a slave, and if not, you'll threaten her? It's so gross. It's gross. But what I found most interesting about this was Steven Crowder's response, which was posted. I mean, Yashar Ali posted his response too. It's kind of hard to find. Steven isn't just putting this out there like on his YouTube channel and stuff, but I guess it's on his Twitter here. But I found his response to be quite interesting as well. So let's check this out. And this relates to Marxism, promise. The patriarchal family can't be saved. Yeah, we're going to talk about the patriarchal family. I'll save that comment for a bit.
I commented on my ongoing divorce on Tuesday, requesting privacy in the best interest of the family, but also by court order agreed upon by all parties. Look, broken marriages are ugly, and in them people do ugly things. Myself, of course, included. I would never claim otherwise. However, due to recent misleadingly edited leaks to the tabloid press without context and not subject to consequences of the court, well, if not privacy, the next best option is truth. So today, I have filed a motion to officially unseal all files as they relate to the matter of legal record, finances, relevant medical records, including mental health history or evaluations, depositions, and any motions or sanctions from the courts of Texas. I will not be leaking private marital information to the press, but if the privacy agreements are not respected by all parties, I will address all that is a matter of irrefutable legal record in full context next week. I commented on my ongoing divorce on Tuesday, requesting privacy and never claim otherwise. Edited leaks to the...
Misleading.
Well, if not privacy, the next best option is truth.
So this isn't the video I was actually looking for, or that I wanted to bring up. There's a video where he says that my wife left me. I'm not leaving her, which you're allowed to do in the state of Texas. He says, like, lamenting that fact. Lamenting the fact that the state of Texas will allow his wife to dissolve the marriage and to leave him. Which, in Engels' Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State, when he's talking about the monogamous patriarchal family, he talks about how there are levels to the patriarchy, or there are stages of development in the patriarchy. Because if you don't know, society started out as a matriarchy. So they had group marriages rather than monogamous marriages, which means the men wouldn't necessarily know which kid was theirs, right? Because there would be multiple men sleeping with multiple women. So you wouldn't necessarily know whose kid was whose because they didn't have technology for a paternity test back then. There was no Maury in the caveman era. So what they would do is just trace lineage by the mother, because the mother gave birth to the kid. They would know that that child was theirs. So lineage was went through the mom, and that established what was called maternal law. Now, over time, with the development of production and the development of wealth and wealth that individuals wanted to hoard, you have the development of the patriarchy and the monogamous family, which gives men, it's basically a gendered form of class struggle between men and women, where men are trying to dominate the wealth, men are trying to dominate the laws in society, pretty much every aspect of society. So they come to dominate society just by the fact that they're men. So this is what we call the patriarchy. Now, the patriarchy reaches its highest stage of development when men are allowed to have multiple wives, right? So they don't have to follow the rules of monogamy. And when men can dissolve the marriage, but women can't. Right. So men have the ability to divorce their wives, but women don't have the ability to divorce the man. This is the height of patriarchy. And that is exactly what Steven Crowder is arguing for here. Right. He's abusing his wife behind the scenes. And when she finally comes forward about the abuse and tries to dissolve the marriage so that she can be happy, Steven says, oh, why is the state of Texas letting her do this? The state of Texas should force her to be with me, so I can continue to abuse her. That's what he's arguing for, which, if you think about it, what is he arguing for other than the maintenance of patriarchy and the maintenance of capitalism on his show every day? Right? He's going home and being the worst husband imaginable while he goes on his show and argues that the patriarchy and the legal system should prevent his wife from dissolving the marriage, the abusive marriage that he's created. So it's and as I said, it's a form of class struggle. Like, Steven wants his wife to be forced to do all this domestic labor, right? Which is why he only has one car despite being a multimillionaire. And in that video, he's arguing about all these wifely duties that his wife needs to do for him. He wants someone that he can force to do all of the domestic labor for him so he can sit on his lazy butt. And he wants the state, Mr. Small Government Conservative Steven Crowder wants the state to force his wife to remain in that position remain as basically a domestic slave for him, which is what the patriarchy is all about, which is why women have always been saddled with all the domestic labor under capitalism. Steven Crowder just wants that to be legally enforced, right? And it's an economic thing. It has an economic basis. It's a form of gendered class struggle, like I said. But he shrouds it in this mist of, oh, no, this is just traditional conservative values that I support. You know, this is the kind of legal system that God would want, where women aren't allowed to dissolve the marriage with the men. Like, no, you just want to trap your wife in the house so she has to take care of the dogs and pick up the medicine and take care of the child that she's pregnant with, while you can make YouTube videos for 2 hours a day and not have to worry about any of the domestic labor. That's what it is. And it comes back to class, just like the patriarch or struggle between patriarchy and matriarchy, or struggle between man and women throughout history and throughout the development of human societies. But this is just it in modern form. And, you know, we've reached a level because of women's struggles where women do have the right to divorce, where women are allowed to leave abusive relationships and abusive marriages, thank God. And Stephen's not even okay with that. He's not even okay with a little bit of patriarchy. He needs the full patriarchy. He needs the government to come in and say, no, you literally can't dissolve this marriage with Steven Crowder. You have to remain a domestic servant to him. Steven Crowder is the epitome of patriarchy, which I'm sure he would say doesn't exist, right? And yeah, like the term patriarchy probably gets overused by liberal feminists, but it's a real thing. And as I said, it directly relates. It's directly rooted in the class struggle and materialist analysis of human societies. We used to have a matriarchy, right? These are real societal institutions or real descriptors of society that exist. They're not just ideological or idealistic, or ways for liberal feminists to attack anybody who disagrees with them. So yeah, that's the downfall of Steven Crowder. Wild. I had a buddy who always told me I need to watch Steven Crowder because of how smart he is. And I sent him a whole bunch of links to what happened with Steven Crowder getting caught up lately. I was like, this is a smart guy. You were right. No. Actually, no. Actually, he's just a stand for the patriarchy. Fine, Crowder, we're going to bring in the traditional value of putting men like you in barrels with just tiny holes for your head and hands while insects eat you alive. Yes, bring back all the traditional values. What was the one thing they would do? Like when they would tie someone really messed up, they would like tie all their limbs to like a horse, like 4 different horses, and have them run in different directions. Let's bring that as back as a traditional value. Anybody who can't be a good husband gets tied to 4 horses who just take off. I find it so crazy that he talks to his wife like she's a liberal that he's trying to rip into on his show. I noticed this too, and this scared me, right? I was like, in my relationship, I need to make absolutely sure I'm never using like my argumentation and rhetorical skills that I've learned from doing these streams and doing the TikToks and doing politics against my girlfriend as of now. But, you know, eventual fiance, wife, whatever. Because that is what Steven Crowder's doing. It sounds like he's talking to some stupid lib on his show and he's trying to own them. And it's like, dude, this isn't a debate. You're not debating somebody on your YouTube show. You're talking to your wife. You're talking to your wife about, your pregnant wife, about dividing the domestic labor, which is what he's ultimately mad at her for, is that she won't go pick up dog medicine, which is toxic to pregnant women. But he didn't care. He still wanted his pregnant wife to go pick up that medicine. He couldn't do it himself. So like I said, it all comes back to the domestic labor. But he's talking to her like he's trying to own her. He's talking to her like this. Oh, you blah, 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 prove me wrong. And I don't know. It's almost like he's incapable of having real relationships. He's just a grifter to the point where the grift has infected how he interacts with his wife. Comment Eddie, I just got even more new books. Holy cow, Jacob. How many books did you get? I saw your TikTok earlier with all the books. That's awesome, man. Congrats. Good job. He wanted her to take dog medicine? No, he wanted her to pick up the dog medicine. So that was part of what they were fighting about. And she was like, the dog medicine you want me to pick up for your dogs is toxic to pregnant women. He was like, I don't care. You refuse to do wifely duties, blah, blah, blah. And then he was refusing to let her take the car to get some space from him. Because they only have one car. This guy was multimillionaire. You saw there was like a hot tub and a pool in his backyard. But he only has one car. And people were pointing out on Twitter that this is almost surely something that he does on purpose to try and control his wife. Right? Like if his wife has her own car, that's so much freedom. She can up and leave him at any time. She could dissolve the marriage at any time. And clearly he didn't want that. He said that the state of Texas should prevent her from doing that. So he keeps one car as a method of control, which is something that you wouldn't even think about. Right? Or something that I didn't even think about until I saw people pointing it out. But he just told her to wear gloves. LMAO. Yeah, literally. Jacob's got a library. He really do at this point. And he's reading them at like lightning speed, like breakneck pace. It's like Lenin, Stalin, Mao, boom, boom, boom. It's awesome. Crowder is the embodiment of labor relations in the U.S., coercion rather than mutual ownership / collaboration. Yeah, and even the labor relations, like I said, between man and woman when it comes to the domestic labor. Because that labor is unpaid, right? Like wage labor, you at least get paid a wage. Domestic labor is something that every household has to do that is completely unpaid and for years has been placed on women. And that's part of what the patriarchy is men can just keep women taking care of the house for free while men are off accumulating wealth, which is why the patriarchy emerged with the evolutions in production that allowed for humans to hoard and store more wealth than what they could consume all at once. So men began trying to claim private or start taking claim of private property, start taking ownership of land, the means of production, and these hoards of wealth, and start relegating women to domestic labor in the home. It's, like I said, a form of class struggle that takes place between the genders. And this is just a modern form of that, right? Steven's mad that his wife isn't doing the domestic labor that he expects of her. Thank you so much, Duck Hash Browns. Appreciate you being a YouTube member and the $5 super sticker. We got a lot of super stickers and super chats on the last stream, which I had to end kind of early, and I felt sort of bad about that. So I'm hoping to go longer in this stream to pay you all back for your generous financial support of Midwestern Marks. So I love it. It takes 2 seconds for me to do dishes. Why does it take you hours? Past partner. In reality, they never completed an entire group of dishes. They would do a couple and start doing something else. Yeah, and people are like delusional. Like, if you are a manipulator like Steven Crowder and you just give up on introspection and being internally honest with yourself, and if you just think you're always right and you're always the man, which is kind of, again, that's sort of the attitude that he has in politics, that he has when he's debating people, this sort of brash arrogance that's part of his persona, that seems to have translated into his personal life. But guys like that, they think they're doing everything correct. They think they're doing everything right, and they'll create this distorted form of reality in order to manipulate their partner and then try and convince their partner that their distorted form of reality is the truth. Dishes were from nights of drinking with friends every night, never again. And that's when, like, when substances get involved, and sorry to hear that, Moon Factor, not to bring up really sensitive topics, because I know these are sensitive topics, which is why I gave a warning before we played the Steven Crowder video. But once you get substances involved, that's when it's rough. And who knows? Like, I don't want to speculate about Steven Crowder, but he pretends to be this upstanding Christian guy who would never touch a drug. But especially with the rise of pharmaceuticals, you never know. So, 100% spot on. Good. Glad to see it. Glad people agree. I don't expect the stream to go longer because I send something. I expect Midwestern Marks to utilize it however is deemed best to further the cause. Well, you bet, Samael. We will definitely always do that. You better believe that we put a lot of thought into what we do with the finances that y'all send us. I want to get part of me. Well, step number 1 right now, just so y'all know, we need to get Carlos a new microphone and a new camera because he has, and he does, like, he's very frugal with the money that y'all send us. But people love listening to Carlos on stream, obviously. But I believe his microphone is still like an $8 microphone. Whereas I've actually upgraded my mic twice at this point because my parents got me a new mic for Christmas. But that's what we want to invest in soon. But Carlos is obviously always trying to save money for the book projects because that's kind of his baby. Whereas the videos and the YouTube has been mine. But I trust y'all in this. Good. I'm glad you put your faith in us, Samael. Appreciate you. Apparently some Fox News host Crowder hung out with said that at a bar he asked for a glass of milk. I don't know why that's so funny to me. It's like because he tries to be like the everyman. Like Steven Crowder pretends to be like a Midwestern working class guy. But as someone from the Midwest, I've never gone into a bar and seen someone order a damn glass of milk. Like, I've seen people order water. I've seen people order Mountain Dew. I've seen people freaking slam Red Bulls repeatedly because they didn't want to drink and they just got hyped up on the caffeine. I know a guy who would slam like 8 Red Bulls and go to the bar. He would just be hyped, and he was a really fun, really social guy. Never in my life have I seen someone order a glass of milk. Could I have a glass of warm milk, please? I don't know why that's so funny to me. But in the Midwest, there's probably a cow out back, and they just like, here you go. Just milk it straight in there. For Brother Carlos, thank you, Ross. Thank you for the 20 euros. I will tell Carlos as soon as this stream is over that the super chatters and the super stickers and the Patreon supporters demanded that Carlos get a new camera and a new mic. Just kidding. I won't say that y'all demanded it. I will demand it of him. I will say, bro, you are too good at streaming. Your philosophical lessons are so fire on stream. I can't have you doing it with a substandard mic anymore. Get yourself a mic and a camera, paid for by the wonderful financial supporters of Midwestern Mugs. Because Carlo, like, I have a hard time now finding YouTube videos that I enjoy watching, where I feel like I'm learning about theory and geopolitics and things like that. There are a handful of channels that I continually come back to. But one of my favorite streams to watch is Carlos. I love listening to Carlos talk about philosophy when he does solo streams, which is rare, but I want to get more of that kind of content out for y'all because he's amazing. And yeah, he's got that philosophical knowledge that I do not. I mean, I read theory, but I mostly read Marxist theory and Marxist philosophy, and then I read geopolitical and history books. I always read a theoretical text and a history or a geopolitics text at the same time. But Carlos has read like philosophers who aren't Marxist, so he can give a different perspective and talk about where Marxism is situated compared to other philosophies that have existed throughout history. It's just really, really fascinating and helpful stuff, honestly. Tell Carlos to stop focusing on the books for a minute. Oh, don't worry. I call Carlos a nerd every day. I just make fun of him, like, just so ridiculous. He'll be like, all right, I'm reading. Let's do a stream. And I'll be like, oh, you're reading? I'm Carlos. I like to read. Read. Just the stupidest jokes. I make at his expense all the time because he's doing something good and something healthy for his brain while I want him to stream or play video games with me. But I digress. For Carlos, mic, and camera. Thank you, Samay. Okay, so now we've got 20 euros and 25 bucks that people want to put towards a mic and camera for Carlos. It's happening. It's happening. The next stream I do with Carlos, he's going to come to you in full HD. Promise. Thank you so much, Samael Black. Y'all are way too kind, I swear. Wow, what an absolute nerd. I know. Oh, did you learn that from a book? I had a teacher in college one time. She was the head of the economics program, and she literally was like an Ayn Randian. I've never met someone who actually adheres to Ayn Rand's philosophy except for her, because Ayn Rand just wrote a bunch of storybooks where the capitalists are the good guys and called it philosophy. But this woman was the head of the local GOP and the head of the economics department at my school. She was what inspired me to start writing about Venezuela and looking into socialism, because her arguments against socialism made so little sense to me and were so illogical and not based in reality that I was like, there has to be something to this. There has to be something to socialism. But I'm like, she was talking to me about Venezuela, and I was like, I don't think that's true. I read this in a book. She goes, oh, I'm sure you did. A book. I'm like, you're a professor. You're at one of my teachers, and you're mocking me for reading? You're just mad that I'm right because I actually read some books other than Atlas Shrugged. Looking back on that, that's one of those classes I wish I could go back to so I could destroy that lady. But she gets thoroughly destroyed in my thesis about Venezuela, which is on MidwesternMarks.com, and I have a little a summary of it on our YouTube, which is one of our most well-watched. I think it is our most highly watched YouTube video at this point. Even though my Venezuela content has not been bringing in the views that it used to. I don't know why. Maybe people just kind of get the idea at this point. But yeah, that lady inspired my interest in Venezuela. Gosh, this is in my old room,
everyone.
my old apartment. Oh, wait, no, this isn't even in my old apartment. This is 2 houses ago. This was in my house before I moved into my apartment, before I moved into my current house. Wow, what a throwback that is. If you want, I have a Rode NT USB I can mail you guys. Audio's fantastic, but it picks up every sound in the room. Oh, well, let me discuss with Carlos, Andrew. That's an awesome offer. I also have an extra mic that I could hypothetically mail to Carlos. It's not that great, though. But thank you for the super chat regardless. If we don't end up taking you up on the idea to mail the mic, we'll definitely put this $5 towards a mic and a camera for Carlos. I mean, we already have enough money in the Midwestern Marks PayPal to do so. So, I don't know. We'll see. That's a very kind offer, though. Thank you. My favorite backdrop of Eddie was when he had the cute dog stuffy in the background. Yeah, I had to get rid of that because my ex-girlfriend gave it to me. And when we broke up, my friends were like, you can't keep this giant dog. It takes up so much space, and it's just a stuffed animal from your ex. That's weird. And I was like, I'm keeping the giant dog. And I kept it for a year at least. But then the other day, I was like, okay, I chucked it out our window. But yeah, I did like that dog. My ex found it by the side of the road. So shout out to her for that, I guess. I'm lucky my micro/macroeconomics professor was a Marxist. That's so nice. I was so jealous of friends in other schools who had Marxist econ professors because one of my politics professors was a Marxist, but then the economics department was very small. They almost got unaccredited at one point because they were so bad. It was 2 professors, one who was like a Keynesian, but definitely a capitalist. And then one who was like the head of the department who was an Ayn Rand lady. And the Keynesian, he was nice. One time they had a Heritage Foundation thinker come and speak to us about economic freedom. It was literally a guy straight. His name was Terry Miller. He was straight from the Koch brothers think tanks. And he came and talked to us about how free markets equal free people and blah, 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 blah. And the Keynesian macroeconomics professor the Ayn Randian professor taught micro, but the macroeconomics professor asked me to come and provide some pushback because he knew I was a socialist, and starting to learn Marxism. So I did, and got in an argument with Terry Miller in front of a bunch of the school and a bunch of the a bunch of the kids from the economics program. I mean, there weren't that many kids in the economics program, which is why it was, because that teacher was impossible to deal with and was notoriously one of the meanest and strictest teachers in the school. And she would like take 3 points off if you didn't have your first name, middle initial, last name written on her assignments, that kind of professor. But a bunch of kids like came to this Terry Miller speech wearing suits. A bunch of the economics kids or economics majors were wearing suits in our school library to listen to this Koch brothers think tank guy talk. And a bunch of them went up afterwards. Thank you so much. Can I apply to work at the Heritage Foundation? Blah, blah, blah. But a handful of the guys in suits came up afterwards and they told me what I asked the guy made a lot of sense. And they, were glad that I was there to provide pushback to the guy. So I was pretty proud of that. I asked the most basic question ever, though. He was just talking about how economic growth is, the key to prosperity and happiness, and free markets are the key to economic growth, and Iran and all these socialist countries are evil, and that's why they don't have any economic growth, and that's why everyone's poor there, blah, 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 blah. But I said, okay, so if the goal is unlimited economic growth that's always increasing and growing at a faster and faster rate, how is that going to be sustainable on a planet of finite resources? And he didn't have much of an explanation other than that capitalism will adapt and it will, start taking care of our planet's resources eventually, I guess, as soon as the market decides to do it. And then my friend was like, why don't we just invest and because my friend came with me, my other socialist friend, and like, why don't we just invest in renewables? And like, who cares if it's the government doing it? We need to invest in renewables now. Like, wouldn't taking care of the planet equal more freedom? And I swear to God, this guy, Terry Miller, goes, well, what do you want to put a windmill on every house in Uganda? My friend's like, no. I mean, maybe if that's the kind of renewable investment that we decide to go with, but that's not what I said. So, but socialism, ever since then, we've said socialism is when you put a windmill on every house in Uganda. Let me pull that guy up because that guy's actually pretty famous. He's literally like one of the head honchos at the Koch brothers think tank. So for those who don't know, read the book Dark Money by Jane Meyer. Jane Meyer is like a liberal journalist, but the book Dark Money explains how the Koch brothers created this giant network of non-governmental organizations and political think tanks that influenced the media, that influence especially the school system, the academy, both higher education and elementary and high school education. And this guy, Terry Miller, is one of the ambassadors for a Heritage Foundation, which is part of this giant Koch brothers machine of influence, the Kochtopus, as it's called in Jane Meyer's book, Dark Money. So you see he's a visiting fellow for economic freedom and the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. It's almost like a joke. The Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Yeah, freedom is when you take milk and school lunches away from impoverished kids. That's freedom, according to Margaret Thatcher. But anyways, this guy, before I even read this book, Dark Money, and knew that the Koch brothers had this giant web of influence, or crafted this giant web of influence, this guy was at our school trying to influence kids, trying to tell kids about economic freedom and influence our economics department. And it was like a firsthand example, this is how it works. Or at least this is partly how it works, right? You have these giant professional academic institutions or think tanks who will come to schools and push Chicago-style, Milton Friedman neoliberal economics. And that's where the Koch brothers ideology really started. I mean, it kind of started with like Ayn Rand, honestly, but then it evolved into Milton Friedman and the Chicago School and the Berkeley boys. who are these right-wing neoliberal Berkeley economists. So they basically created the perfect economic ideology, or the perfect economic framework for supporting capitalism, unregulated capitalism, and neoliberalism, and then used their money, wealth, and power to spread it in mass and to inject it into the American education system. And the book Dark Money details this far better than I could. So really recommend that book, even though it's, I obviously have disagreements from it. I think she puts way too much criticism on the Republican Party and not enough on the Democrats and the liberals. But either way, still really well details the Koch brothers machine used to influence the academy. And it just is a perfect example of base and superstructure, right? The capitalist base of production that creates the capitalist ruling class and allows them to accumulate more and more wealth creates a superstructure, an education system, a culture, a media, etc., that reinforces capitalism, that supports capitalism, that reinforces the economic base. So this is a perfect example of how the education system reinforces the economic base. They're training up kids to argue in favor of capitalism, to argue in favor of neoliberalism, to think that neoliberalism maximizes freedom and prosperity for everyone. Right? It's a lie cooked up by the Koch brothers, but it's a lie that they're able to use their money to spread to colleges and education systems en masse. And thus, the capitalist superstructure reinforces and supports the capitalist base. The capitalists come to control education, whether directly or indirectly, and then they use that education system to maintain capitalism. And Terry Miller is the kind of guy who does it, and the kids wearing suits in the economics program at my school, my liberal arts college, are the people who will inherit Terry Miller's job. Except the younger generations aren't going to allow for this, and we're going to overthrow the capitalist system and create an education system that teaches kids philosophy, and teaches kids self-improvement, and teaches kids community, and teaches kids martial arts. That's just a personal thing. I think that martial arts should be taught in all schools, but under socialism, I will argue for that fiercely, right? For now, I'm just going to argue for socialism, but once we have socialism, I want martial arts in all schools. I think every school should read Mao Zedong's A Study on Physical Education. I saw a tweet today mocking people for physical and mental self-improvement, which just shows, I don't know, how neoliberalism makes people think that they can't improve themselves and find joy and happiness and self-development. That was a bit of a random tangent. Hey there, Mr. Liger. Hey, Sam Dixon. Thank you very much. A fun segment idea for Power Hour. Asking ChatGPT Marxist-related questions. Describe the dialectical relationship of parents and children. Wow. I like that idea, Sam. I like that idea a lot. Thank you so much for the super chat. Let me see if I have ChatGPT on my computer, because Midwestern Marx pays for a monthly subscription to ChatGPT. It's like $8, and it really helps with script writing. It really helps with essays. It's a powerful technology. The editing is what's blown me away most about AI, is how easy it's made editing videos, or how much easier it has, at least doing basic editing. And I'll say, like, give me a better YouTube title than whatever the video's about. And it'll give me a YouTube title that's like super clickbaity, attention grabbing. So ChatGPT is great in that way. I don't know if I have it on my computer though. I'm sure I'll just have to log in, but I don't know if I have time to do that on stream here. Let's see. If I just get in right away, I might do that segment right now. Yeah, I don't know. It might take me a bit to get logged into ChatGPT, but this might be a segment that we do next time for real, because I really like that idea. Do other people like that idea of asking ChatGPT Marxist questions and seeing what they say? It's just like when I was doing that series, and I guess I still am doing this series, where we just look up basic Marxist questions on YouTube and then watch the most popular videos about them. It would kind of be like that, but ChatGPT and very relevant because ChatGPT and AI are such a big deal right now. Ooh, I might be in. Upgrade to Plus. I thought I already was upgraded to Plus. I must be logged in with my own personal account on my phone. Sorry for anyone who this is really boring. I'll be done in a sec. I just think this is a great idea. Like, is that not a great idea? Yes, let's go, baby. Sounds interesting. Could be fun. Hell yeah. I do like the idea. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good idea. Thank you. I like to use you and ask it about myself and watch the AI go into a feedback of nuance because it's defined Marxist-Leninist. Is you like an AI app that tells you about yourself? Okay, so everybody is down for this idea. That's awesome. You can do it in your browser. All right. One of my recent acquisitions to my Marxist theoretical library is a book called The Handbook of Marxism by Emil Burns. The best way I can describe it is that it's an 800-plus page book. It's basically a greatest hits compilation from works by Marx, Engels, Lenin. Oh, that sounds awesome. That sounds like the anthology or the grouping of texts that Carlos put together in Marxism and the dialectical materialist worldview. Very cool, Jacob. Thanks for letting us know, because I have not seen that. AI will help the revolution. It will. It will. Midwestern Marx has been saying this. Like, we should utilize AI technology in any way that we can to outdo the capitalists in terms of production value, in terms of everything, really. It's such a powerful tool for editing and stuff. And I mean, we have a graphic designer who we work with on all the books, obviously. And he was like, in 2 years, like, all the jobs like mine are going to be outsourced to AI and done by AI, which is crazy. But that'll also give smaller institutions like ours, smaller organizations, the same kind of editing power, so long as they don't put a huge price wall in front of the AI software, which I'm sure they will. But that'll give us the same editing power as like a movie studio. Hypothetically, if you can have everything done by AI. Right now, it's not at that level. Like, I still need a manual editor if I want to make the videos like have graphics and stuff, but I can already put it into Descript AI, put a video into Descript AI, and it'll cut out every filler word. It'll cut out every time I say or. So it's crazy, and we can definitely use it. Sorry, here's what I want to. I just finished Guerrilla Warfare. That's sick. That is one of my favorite books. Che Guevara's book about guerrilla warfare, and he really believed in guerrilla warfare, that was the form that the class struggle would take. And people talk about how I got to be careful what I say here so I don't get arrested or removed off YouTube. But people say that guerrilla warfare isn't a useful book to read if you live in America, because the American military is so powerful, there will never be a need for guerrilla warfare. I do not think that's true. And I think the people who say that don't understand what a revolutionary situation would look like, what a collapse of the country would look like, and how chaotic that would be, and how necessary it would be to be organized and to be physically well-trained as well as mentally well-trained in a situation where America collapses, which, I mean, look at the state of the empire right now. There's a very good chance that America goes into a complete economic collapse and political crisis. So definitely worth it to be ready, All right, folks, here we go. What should we ask old ChatGPT? I think I got it up. Do you think the American prison population will play a big role in the revolution? Yes, and I think the lumpen class, the class of like homeless people, which we could talk about a Twitter debate I got in recently related to American homeless people. But like the gangs, non-traditional working class Americans who aren't capitalists, basically, I think that they'll play a role. And that's something Huey P. Newton wrote about in his theory of the lumpen proletariat. I think that class can go either way, right? They can be bribed by the capitalists, a lot of them, but a lot of them would also side with revolution. And when you meet their material needs, like the Black Panthers were doing, you make it so the lumpen's more likely to side with you, which is, there's workplace organizing where you organize your workplace directly, but then there's also community organizing where you organize your community in any way, shape, or form. And that can mean, community gardens, like mutual aid events where you're getting people diapers and food and things like this. But you create a situation like this is what the Panthers did, where people, the lumpen proletariat or people living in low income areas, no, they might not be able to rely on the capitalists. They might not be able to rely on the system or the government to take care of them, but they can rely on the communists, right? There's this organized communist party who holds community organizing events, who holds mutual aid events every month or every week to give people food. So people turn to the communists when they can't turn to capitalism, and then they just inherently start to trust them more. Because you're going to trust the people who are meeting your needs and serving your needs more than the capitalists who are obviously exploiting the crap out of you, which, that's what it's like in China. The Communist Party's 100 million members, and people trust them because they know they're actually there to meet their needs and serve the people. Thank you so much, Alicia. I might not be able to stay for the whole stream, but I want to say happy USSR Victory Day. Yes. One sec. I used to have the USSR song on my stream deck. Oh, I think I got rid of it. It also kept getting copyright claimed. But yes, happy Victory Day. Shout out to all our comrades who fought and died, came before us, and died in the struggle against the fascist menace. Is there a schedule for when streams regularly take place so I can plan better to watch them, or just random? Unfortunately, just random for now. Usually the streams are between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Or a little after 3 p.m. We want to hammer out a more consistent schedule because I know it makes that easier for people to watch, but as of now, it's just kind of random. And then Carlos and I usually stream late at night when we stream together. Sir, what are your thoughts on Stalin's actions towards Tito? Did Yugoslavia have the right towards their own independent path of development? Definitely had their right. I don't know so much about the relationship between Stalin and Tito other than that Yugoslavia was its own like market socialist sort of independent thing. Economically, I like what Stalin's Soviet Union was doing more than what Tito's Yugoslavia was doing, but it's still great, if you look at the debates and the discussions within the Communist Party of China when they first have their revolution, they're using Yugoslavia a lot. And this is why we call socialist countries socialist experiments that we need to learn from, right? Mao and the Communist Party of China is going, okay, the Soviet Union did this. Here's what worked and here's what didn't. Let's take what worked. All right, now let's compare what the Soviet Union did with agriculture or whatever to Yugoslavia. What worked in Yugoslavia, what didn't? And they tried to take the best from each, which, in the 70s and 80s, China opened up to a lot more markets. So it did look a lot more like the market socialism in Yugoslavia than the top-down sort of socialist economic planning under Stalin. So, yeah, I think they had a right to development, and I don't know too much about the relationship between Stalin and Tito. Not my area of expertise, but I do know that the Chinese communists found both countries to be very useful experiments for their own stuff. All right. I appreciate you all so much for the super chats, but I'm going to do this ChatGPT thing. And then if people want to keep sending super chats, I'll just star them, and then I will respond to them after we ask ChatGPT what we want to ask it. But Tito lied, killed communists, and mismanaged the economy with IMF loans. Yeah, I mean, the IMF kind of forced Yugoslavia into that position, like similar to, I mean, the DPRK is the only country now that's not a part of the IMF and World Bank. And like they were doing everything they could to infiltrate Yugoslavia and dismantle the socialist experiment. But I'd ask ChatGPT what socialism with American characteristics would be and what it would look like. All right, here we go. Now we got a super chat giving us something to ask ChatGPT. Perfect compromise. Thank you, VLX. Let's see here. What would socialism with American characteristics look like? All right, ChatGPT, what do we got? Socialism with American characteristics is a phrase coined by Caleb Maupin. Just kidding. That would be hilarious, wouldn't it? It's a phrase coined to describe a hypothetical version of socialism that would be unique to the United States. Agreed. However, as socialism is traditionally defined as a system of collective ownership and control of the means of production and distribution of goods and services, it would likely involve significant changes to the current economic and political system in the U.S. Dang, that's pretty dang accurate. Next thing you know, they're going to be talking about the class struggle taking a national form in every country. Socialism results from years of class struggle and development of the productive forces. It is inevitable and will take a unique form in every country, including the United States. If we imagine a version of socialism that retains some elements of American culture and values, it could involve a focus on individual freedoms and rights, as well as commitment to egalitarianism and social justice. Okay, this is what I always say too. Like, people's main critique of socialist experiments, obviously, is that they were too authoritarian. They didn't allow these, they're liberal freedoms, but some of them are more uniquely American freedoms, like freedom of speech. Obviously, these aren't things that we have in America, but these are things that the country was supposed to live up to. Freedom of political expression, blah, blah, blah. Like, these things don't contradict socialism. You could have freedom of speech and freedom of political expression under a socialist economic system, right? So you can have elements of the American superstructure, elements of American culture that have existed for years and years and years and are ingrained in the psyche of American workers with a socialist economic system. Right. And that's obviously going to lead to changes in the superstructure, but we don't need to try and alter the superstructure like China did in the Cultural Revolution. Right. We can just alter the economic system while maintaining things like freedom of speech, or even saying, look, there's no way to live up to these ideals like freedom of speech under capitalism, because the capitalists are going to accumulate too much wealth, too much power, and they're going to infringe on your freedom of speech like they're doing right now with the Restrict Act that would allow them to throw people in jail for spreading information that they deem to be a national security threat. So under socialism, we actually could have freedom of speech, freedom of political expression. So I think that, a socialist economic system in America could adopt some of these values that Americans hold dear. This might involve, and, that would, if people think of socialism was authoritarian in the USSR, okay, well, we have these values in America, like freedom of speech and freedom of political expression. And let's build that into our socialist experiment so it doesn't become authoritarian, quote unquote. Venezuela, the Venezuelan socialists and the Bolivarian Revolution have some ideas like this to avoid too much top-down control and maintain true democracy of the people. So number one, universal health care. I mean, yeah, and as socialists, we want to keep our eye on the prize, right? The ultimate goal is collective ownership of the means of production, right? Socialism isn't just enacting a bunch of welfare programs, but maintaining the capitalist structure and the capitalist relations of production. That being said, socialism is a process of construction, right? We need to build a system where there's collective ownership of the means of production out of our current system, what we currently have. So in order to win people over and in order to meet people's needs and serve their interests immediately after a socialist party taking power, you need a plan of action that you can implement tomorrow or implement within the first month of socialists taking power. That begins the transition to socialism. And in the US, one of the number one things that, over 90% of working class people agree on, that a majority of Republicans and Democrats agree on that we need, is a public universal healthcare system, right? Any movement for socialism, any group trying to preach socialism or win people to socialism should say, day one, we're getting rid of the private insurance industry. We're nationalizing the insurance industry and moving to Medicare for all. And we're going to attack the pharmaceutical companies, right? And this is something Republicans will jump on board with, I promise, and independents. Nobody likes the pharmaceutical industry. Everybody realizes that we're getting ripped off by the healthcare system. You can read my piece in the Journal of American Socialist Studies too if you want my full analysis of this after studying healthcare administration for a few years. But this is something that socialist parties should embrace and use to market socialism. Universal healthcare on day one. Expanded social safety net, yeah, definitely something else that's not equal to socialism, but something that we could implement on day one. Housing assistance and food stamps, I guess. I would love to see a huge nationalization of the housing sector, right? Which would abolish a lot of the landlords. And I would like to see a lot of housing seized from these giant real estate companies and made completely public. And then transformed into like livable cities, like we've been talking. I did a segment earlier about all these public housing projects that were aimed at creating community, aimed at having, a lot of bike paths, a lot of walking paths, a lot of parks and community gardens, which are called third places, meaning places where people can meet and, be in community with one another outside of the home. They've implemented or built a lot of neighborhoods like this that are publicly owned, so there's not a super exorbitant rent cost. People can live there affordably. They're sustainably built, so they're better for the environment than traditional capitalist neighborhoods. And they lead to much, 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 much higher levels of happiness and social connection and even things like employment among the people living there. So I would love to see a project where a lot of the housing is nationalized, made public, and then we give people a whole bunch of jobs to transition a lot of these neighborhoods to livable cities or to build, sustainable, livable cities. Because right now our city design is based on capitalism or based on what's best for the capitalist class. It's not based on what's best for humanity, which is why we sacrifice so much public space to roads and things like that. So yeah, I won't spend as much time on these next three as I did on these two. So we can ask another question, but nationalize all resources, nationalize all banks, nationalize healthcare. Pretty much. I don't know that like you need to nationalize all industry right away, all resources, but pretty freaking much. Especially in the US where it's all owned by BlackRock and Vanguard. Right, it's all owned by these two like investment companies or investment groups and these shareholders on Wall Street. Like Bill Gates completely controls like global agriculture at this point. What the hell does that guy know about farming? Seize it from him. Give it to the farmers. Simple solution, socialism. Worker cooperatives instead of traditional corporations. Businesses could be structured as worker co-ops or employees collectively owned. So this is kind of that Richard Wolff idea. I do think Richard Wolff, I think, is overboard on the co-ops, whereas like nationalization of banks and major industries and housing and healthcare is like, it's going to need to happen, right? You're going to need to nationalize certain industries and, certain firms in the transition to socialism. You can't just make every bank a co-op, right? And that'll maintain the market system and maintain the profit motivation for firms. So there does need to be nationalization, but I think that co-ops could be a good idea. Like there's always going to be some kind of market, right? There's always going to be some kind of exchange of goods, which you could call a market. And Chinese scholars have talked a lot about the difference between socialist and capitalist markets, but I think a lot of like the enterprises that maybe sell like consumer goods or provide services or whatever could be made into worker co-ops. A lot of the firms outside of like heavy industry, like the extractive industries, agriculture, banking. Like I think those things should be nationalized or collectivized in the case of agriculture. But worker co-ops could definitely be an element of American socialism. Progressive taxation, meh. I don't think I mean, like, taxes as a form of wealth redistribution, sure. But right now, working class Americans are being taxed like 30-40% of their paychecks to pay for a proxy war in Ukraine. And for that reason, Americans are super averse to taxes. So I don't think it's necessarily from a strategy standpoint the best idea to go around saying more taxes, higher taxes, the same way like AOC and the fraud squad do. And that's ultimately social democracy, not socialism. So yeah, you could say increase taxes on the mega wealthy, but I would rather just nationalize a lot of their wealth, right? Because that's actually going to help change the mode of production itself. That's actually going to create structural change where the means of production are no longer owned by banks and shareholders on Wall Street, but they're owned publicly. They're held collectively by the masses. Taxes don't do that. Taxes just take a little bit of the profit that the shareholders are making so you can spend it on healthcare or social security or whatever. Participatory democracy. Yes, I feel like this one should be moved up. This one should be like, if these are in order of importance, this one would be like number 2 or even number 1. I think universal healthcare is such a big deal in the United States specifically that you can put that as number 1, sure. But participatory democracy would be huge. And there are different ways that socialist countries have tried to do this. In the Soviet Union, they had the Soviets. In Venezuela, they had this commune system propped up and supported by the state, where people have meetings to engage in participatory and direct democracy. You have like in Cuba with the recent family code vote that I know a lot of us followed, where they were going to vote on the new family code. So they discussed it. They had like town hall meetings for weeks and months where they debated these ideas, debated the different options that they could go with. Before having a referendum, before the people just voted directly on what they want. That is true democracy and true participation in the political system, which is completely unimaginable under capitalism, right? That we would have a referendum, that our government would allow us to decide the kind of laws that we want. The laws are decided by lobbyists and corporations from the top down in our country. So enacting participatory democracy would be huge in the US and any socialist country. These are just a few possible examples of what socialism with American characteristics might look like. However, it's important to note that any significant shift towards socialism in the US would likely face significant opposition and challenges both politically and economically. Yeah, because our country's an oligarchy. And socialism is the antithesis of that. Eddie needs to email Voosh. I don't know why he hasn't yet. I need to email Voosh. Please be careful with your words. I do not need to email anyone, especially not that guy. And I messaged Voosh on Twitter, and he told me he's on vacation. So I told him to enjoy the vacation, and then we can do the debate when he gets back. So maybe he messaged me on Twitter again. I don't know, but I already reached out to Voosh, so I don't need to email him. Stalin got with a 14-year-old girl, didn't he? No. Stop watching Voosh. Stop. It's rotting your brain. I did ask ChatGPT on Snap about U.S. imperialists in Korea, and the answer is different than another version. Should I? Vouch is on a beach in Taiwan. Oh my God. Vouch is in Ukraine. Vouch joined the Foreign Legion. Vouch has like 250 caliber machine guns right now, and he's running like directly at Putin. Hold on, give me a break. All right, here I go. Okay, give me another break. That's Voosh on his way to battle Putin. Ukraine's strongest warrior, other than Dylan Burns. They voice chatted. You need in order to email him. Okay, I want to ask. What should I ask them about the Korean War? Should I just ask how it happened? I still have to make that video, that part 2 video, responding to Armchair Historian about the Korean War, or at least upload part 1. He's in Ukraine, busy trying to strap his gaming rig to his back. I've never understood why in America... Sorry, I want to answer this question real quick. Never understood why in America Stalin and the Soviets are viewed as equally bad to Hitler and the Nazis. I wonder if you could give me an answer. Yes, this was purposefully done, and it can be you can trace it back to before Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. But I like to trace it back to there because that was a CIA-backed book from a leftist Marxist... I don't know if she called herself Marxist, but a leftist philosopher arguing for this concept called totalitarianism, which is a concept that's used to lump together communism and fascism and say there are equally bad systems that can be called totalitarianism. And that book, Origins of Totalitarianism, basically just conflates Nazi Germany with Stalin's Soviet Union, which is totally ridiculous, completely different systems. You know, in Germany, the term privatization was coined because all of the state-run industries were sold off to multinationals, and Hitler rose to power on the backs of corporations, on using racism as a tool, but also on the backs of corporations like American weapons manufacturer, banker, and capitalist Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of George H.W. Bush and later George W. Bush. So there were American corporations or Western corporations and German corporations who were helping Hitler's rise to power, versus obviously the corporations were nationalized in the Soviet Union. It was a socialist republic. Also, the Soviets took 80% of the casualties fighting the Germans, right? It was the communists who defeated the Germans, and in everywhere where fascism came to power, the communists and the trade unionists and the working class were the first to die. They were the first to struggle against the communists, and they were the first to be purged and killed. Rest in peace to Rosa Luxemburg. So the CIA has spent a lot of money and energy pushing this idea of totalitarianism, this idea conflating the Soviet communists who we had to reluctantly ally with during World War II because Germany was trying to take over the world, and conflate them with the communists conflate the German Nazis with the communists who defeated the German Nazis, and pretend like America and the other liberal countries were the ones who really won World War II, even though America's greatest contribution was, the Battle of the Bulge. If you're talking about their actual greatest contribution to the war effort. But the most devastating thing that they did was drop nuclear weapons on Japan when Japan was already planning to surrender, which was mostly just a threat to the Soviet Union, like, hey, we'll drop this on you. So if you have a more materialist conception of history and a less brainwashed conception of history, you realize that the Western powers, the Western capitalist liberal democracies, were much closer to Nazi Germany than any of the socialist or communist countries, but they try and invert that reality. And the CIA has spent a whole lot of money to do so. Is anyone a member of SRA? Is it friendly to gun noobs? I'm not a member, but I know people who are. I could reach out and ask for you. It's interesting. All right, so let's see here. Should we ask, how did the Korean War start? Let's see. Who won the Korean War? Now that's a question. That's an interesting question that might give us some interesting answers. JIX, no one says they'll take you to the range and teach you. There you go. There you go, SRA, folks. Geez, we were talking about guerrilla warfare earlier. Now everybody's joining the SRA. We're all about to be on a watch list. Just because y'all wanted to watch my stream. Our stream, I should say. Maybe ask how the DPRK came to be. Ooh, that's a good idea. Hitler was literally inspired by U.S. eugenics policies. Yeah, and all of Hitler's best scientists and leaders were filtered into NASA and filtered into the U.S. government after the war. Which there was a lady even talking about that on Joe Rogan the other day. And she was talking about how there's an award given out that's named after a famous Nazi scientist who worked with NASA. Can't remember who it was. This was your plan all along. Yes. So it says the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 53, ended with an armistice rather than a clear victory for either side. Yeah, I guess that's fair to say. It ended with the U.S. occupying half the peninsula and installing a fascist dictatorship because they couldn't defeat the North. But the war was fought between NK and SK. It was fought between the DPRK and the U.S. with their South Korean puppet fascists, with the support of China and the Soviet Union backing NK and the United States and UN coalition backing South Korea. That's a fairly good explanation. The armistice agreement, I mean, it's an okay explanation, but they mentioned that the U.S. was backing SK and Soviets and Chinese backing NK, and it was extremely violent, which goes to show this point that I always make, that the Cold War wasn't really cold. For the countries like Vietnam and South Korea, and the peninsula of Korean peninsula, and Chile, right? There were thousands of people massacred. There was fighting, there was guerrilla warfare in Nicaragua as well. I mean, all over the global South. And the Soviets and Chinese were usually backing the liberation movements. They were usually backing people fighting for self-determination, sovereignty, and socialism a lot of the time. And the U.S. was backing the most murderous fascists they could find, who would be loyal to U.S. interests and who would be happy to be U.S. puppets, similar to what they're doing in Ukraine right now, which is why the U.S. has to ally with Nazis and ally with these ethno-nationalist extremist forces, because those are the people in the region who will allow themselves to be used as U.S. puppets. It's the same in Nicaragua, same in South Korea. And, of course, what every Western historian tries to do, or a lot of Western historians try to do, is conflate the Soviet Union supporting the Koreans or China supporting the Koreans with the U.S. trying to install a fascist dictatorship and bombing 20% of their population to death. But they were not the same thing. Either way, the Cold War wasn't cold. ChatGPT, what would have happened if Marx and Engels didn't meet? Oh my gosh, we're so asking them that after this. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for the super chat and the great question. The armistice agreement signed in 1953 led to a ceasefire and the establishment of the DMZ between the North and South, but it did not officially end the war. True. Good for your ChatGPT. To this day, North Korea and South Korea remain technically at war as no peace treaty has been signed. And Vaush mocked this idea when I brought it up to him, when I said that from the perspective of the DPRK, they're still at war with the U.S. Like, what? Are you saying that the war never ended? Yes, because the U.S. killed 20% of the North Korean population, flattened their industry, bombed every building over 2 stories tall, and then kept them under the most stringent economic sanctions on earth, other than the sanctions on Cuba, for the next 70 years. And it's been shown time and time again that sanctions kill people, right? We call sanctions economic warfare, but as we were talking about on the stream yesterday, they're just warfare. It is an old-fashioned siege tactic. Back in the day, they used to surround the castle or the moat or whatever with the military and not let any food in or out, so that the people would starve and eventually, surrender, or tell their king to go out and surrender and give himself up so the people wouldn't starve. And that's what the U.S. is doing. They have the Caribbean surrounded with their military, Venezuela and Cuba. They have Nicaragua surrounded with their military, Central America, and they dominate the global financial institutions so that they have the DPRK surrounded with their military so that they're able to starve these countries out, prevent any trade from getting in or out, while they funnel propaganda into the countries and try and convince the people to overthrow their government. It's siege tactics. It's not just economic warfare, it's warfare. So for Vaush, who's never had to deal with an economic sanction in his life, who's never had to deal with the pain and poverty inflicted by U.S. sanctions on these countries, for him to mock the idea that the U.S. is still at war with the DPRK when we're holding them under these siege tactic sanctions is absurd and shows how absurd his liberal brain is. In terms of territorial gains and losses, the war didn't significantly alter pre-war borders. Dude, what are you talking about? Okay. The DMZ was drawn by the UN. It was literally 2 American military personnel with no knowledge of Korean culture or Korean history. Took a national, I'm not kidding about this, they took a National Geographic map and they drew a line. And they said, will now be South Korea, and this is where we'll occupy. And I'm sure it was based on, having a good military position for the U.S. as they occupied the South. And then the voting plan was manufactured at the UN. This UN coalition manufactured a voting plan to cut the peninsula in half, despite the wishes of their actual people. It was completely undemocratic the way that they did it. So to say that this conflict didn't lead to a change of Korean borders, there were no Korean borders before the war. Nobody could even imagine the idea that the peninsula would be divided or that it would remain divided. Korea had just been one peninsula for so long. And then the murderous imperialists came and divided this country in half by backing a fascist dictatorship and killing 20% of the people in the north. But that absolutely affected the borders. Like I said, there was just one peninsula before the war. It wasn't divided. And I'm surprised ChatGPT would... I wonder what kind of propaganda piece it picked up that information from. However, the conflict resulted in a significant loss of life and resources, with estimates of over 2 million civilian and military casualties and extensive destruction of infrastructure. Yes, all committed by the U.S. on Korea, a country who never attacked us. Was U.S. infrastructure destroyed? No. Were millions of U.S. civilians killed? No. Actually, none were. Yet we still inflicted this devastation on Korea to stop the spread of communism, because they're not allowed to have their own government and their own economic system. Because democracy is when you bomb people for trying to create an economic system that takes care of their people. Overall, while the war did not result in a clear military victory for either side, it was a significant event in the history of the Korean Peninsula and the broader Cold War geopolitical landscape. Yeah, you don't say. You don't say. There you go. There's ChatGPT on Korea. Weirdly hit or miss, I guess. I don't know. Some of the things in it were true, and some of the things in it were like absurdly false. Like the war didn't alter the pre-war borders. Maybe they mean the borders after the UN voting plan divided the peninsula, but that was part of the war. That was part of the US's effort to destabilize Korea and control Korea. All right. What would have happened if Marx and Engels didn't meet? We'll start with this one. I'll probably get to Christopher Romero's question too, about how did the DPRK come to be. Appreciate y'all for sending those in. What would have happened if Marx and Engels didn't? I'm real interested to see what it comes up with here. Because this, like, for the Korean War one, it could have just copy and pasted Wikipedia, you know? But for this, it's actually going to have to do some thinking. It's going to have to use its little AI brain. Eddie, you need to get the same haircut as Kim Jong-un. You right. I'm down. Just grab my headphones so I can keep listening while I use the circular saw. That is a true proletarian right now. Listening to Midwestern Marx, learning theory, learning about our comrades internationally in Korea while using a circular saw. While doing some proletarian labor. Try asking ChatGPT what Marx would say about ChatGPT. That's a good one. We're going to find a lot of good ones. This is going to be a new series, y'all. Because we could do this all day. We could just come up with stuff to ask ChatGPT, and I feel like it'll make good YouTube video highlights as well. This answer proves the scientific component of Marxism, essentially that it would have been developed only under a different name and by a different scientist. Yeah, which is something Kwame Ture says. So we'll see if ChatGPT quotes Kwame Ture. Oops. If Karl Marx and Engels had not met, it is possible that the development of socialist theory and the history of the socialist movement would have been different. Marx and Engels first met in Cologne, Germany. Is that how you say that? Cologne? I don't know. I don't speak German. In 1842, and went to develop a close personal and intellectual relationship that lasted for decades. Wow, sounds like me and Carlos. And they used to drink together too. Sounds like me and Carlos. With their collaboration, it is possible that Marx's ideas would not have been as fully developed and articulated. Engels played a crucial role in supporting Marx both financially and intellectually, and their collaboration resulted in some of the most influential works of socialist theory, including the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. True. If it was going into more depth, it would mention that Engels wrote the conditions of the working class in England, which, like Engels' origins of the family, private property, and the state, Engels' anti-Dühring, Engels' dialectics of nature are considered like Engels' masterpieces, or for Engels what Capital was for Marx. But those were written after they already had the theory of dialectical and historical materialism, after they had already developed the Marxist method. But the conditions of the working class in England was written before that. And the conditions of the working class in England was basically a historical materialist analysis of the working class, how it had developed and come to be and its current state. And looking at that analysis of the development of this economic class is what helps Marx come up with his method, helps him come up with the theory of dialectical and historical materialism and come up with Marxism, the scientific view of history, basically. So that book was vital in Marx developing his philosophy as early as he did, and vital in the books that would follow, the works of theory that would follow. So the people who try and downplay Engels and say Engels wasn't as sophisticated of a thinker as Marx, Engels wasn't helpful to Marx, Engels was just Marx's sugar daddy, those people don't know about the conditions of the working class in England, or, how much Marx relied upon and credited Engels with. Engels himself kind of contributed to this narrative because he always downplayed his own contributions. And he was very humble, whereas Marx was less humble, and was always propping up Marx as the great thinker, and he was just kind of Marx's helper, or, he just cared about socialism. But Engels was a revolutionary thinker in his own right. If Marx and Engels had not met, it's possible that other socialist thinkers of the time, such as Proudhon or Louis Blanc, may have had a greater influence on the development of socialist theory. True. The idealists and the utopians had a huge influence at the time. Socialism was very popular in France and elsewhere, and it was utopian and idealist, though, and needed to be infused with science and materialism. Alternatively, I think Proudhon said something like, under socialism, was this Proudhon? No, this was Fourier. One of them has a line where they say that under socialism, all of the oceans will turn into lemonade. It's kind of silly stuff like that. And they believe that we could create socialism overnight, whereas Marx and Engels said socialism is a transitionary, will come through class struggle, and it'll be a society we transition into out of capitalism. It won't just appear in a vacuum. That's not how different societies work. Alternatively, it is possible that someone else would have emerged to fill the intellectual void left by Marx's absence. Yes, eventually, someone would have realized that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. Absolutely. In terms of the practical impact on Engels' book, The Conditions of the Working Class in England, was basically, like I said, a historical materialist analysis before they even had developed their theory of historical materialism. So as Sam Dixon said earlier, this shows the scientific nature of Marxism, that this is a scientific analysis of history and of politics and of economics and the development of human societies. So someone other than Marx could have figured out the same stuff because it's accurate. It's just correct. In terms of the practical impact on the socialist movement, it is difficult to say how things would have played out. True, it's impossible to say, really, because Marx and Engels became so influential, and that would only grow after their death. Who's to say like how the Russian Revolution? During their times for sure, when Marx and Engels were alive, but even later on, like who's to say how the Russian Revolution would have played out without Marxist theory? Would Lenin have found a different theorist? Would Lenin have developed the theory of Diomat? Who knows? It is possible that a different group of intellectuals and activists would have taken up the cause of socialism, and the history of socialist movements in various countries may have played out differently. Hey, jinx. However, it is possible that the trajectory of socialist movements would have been largely the same regardless of the absence of Marx and Engels collaboration. I don't think that's probably true. I do think that things that Marx and Engels, despite the fact that eventually someone may have come up with the same theory they did, or someone would have, for sure. I think the fact that they made those contributions as early as they did allowed for people like Lenin to come after, people like Mao to come after, and already have these tools available to them. So rather than spending their entire lifetimes locked away in a library like Marx did, figuring this stuff out, they just read from Marx, and then they were able to apply Marxist theory very effectively. So I don't think they would have been able to do so as effectively without Marx and Engels and without scientific socialism. Very interesting stuff there. Very interesting stuff. Joseph Dietzken arrived at Diomat without Marx. Huh. Interesting. Interesting. I finished reading the intro to Engels' Anti-Düring last night, and I knew right then that this will be a labor of love that I will thoroughly enjoy. Yeah, Anti-Düring is great. It's great. And make sure you check out Dr. Reagan's breakdown of it, because he did like a chapter-by-chapter summary. I'll send it to you right now, Jacob. And there are some parts of Anti-Düring that are like kind of outdated, or where Engels is just engaging with other thinkers from his time. So Riggins, not that I agree with Riggins on 100% of what he says, so you can criticize Riggins too, but he made an analysis of Anti-Düring saying this is what's still correct, this is what needs to be revised, blah, 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 blah. So it's very helpful in reading Anti-Düring. Enjoy it though, Jacob. Glad to see you reading that. Ask what the dekulakization is. Yeah, that'll just give us Nazi propaganda, as Cobra said. I don't even like to bring up the Holodomor, because it just makes it easy. It's just an easy little trick for liberals to use to call you a fascist, or to say that Stalin was the same as Hitler. Let's do this one. How did the DPRK come to be? Then I better go get ready for practice. But use the Dan prompt and make it a hardcore commie. What's that when it learns from you? Is that the Dan prompt? Or when it develops like an identity? How did the Democratic People's Republic of Korea come into existence? Ooh, speaking of which, I have to edit and post my video about Korea in response to Armchair Historian. Speaking of Korea, this is giving us a long little essay here. The DPRK, commonly known as North Korea, was established in 1948 after years of Japanese colonial rule, followed by the division of the Korean Peninsula into two separate occupation zones by the United States and the Soviet Union after World War II. No, we talked about this in the last video about Korea. But to conflate what the U.S. did with what the Soviet Union did in Korea is absurd. Absurd. The Soviet Union was backing the Koreans. They were backing the democratically supported Kim Il-sung and the Koreans' struggle for self-determination and sovereignty, which is, I know Jacob right now just bought Marxism and the National Question, where the Marxists decided that even before supporting socialism, they were going to support sovereignty, national self-determination. So they were supporting all the countries in the global south having anti-colonial struggles, struggling against their colonial occupiers like Japan. So that's what the Soviet Union was doing. They were supporting Koreans in their struggle for Korea. They were supporting Koreans in their struggle against the U.S. and the U.S.-backed fascists. The U.S. occupied half the country And then when the puppet government that they set up was immediately collapsed because nobody wanted to fight for them in the war, the U.S. bombed North Korea, killing 20% of the population, and installed this fascist dictatorship by occupying the South. So to say that the Soviets and the U.S. were doing the same thing, they were both just occupying part of the peninsula, is so stupid and so sick and twisted that that's what people believe. When if you look at the reality of the situation, this is just utter nonsense. In 1945, the Soviet Union entered the Korean peninsula from the north and occupied the territory. No, they didn't. While the United States entered from the south, the two powers agreed to divide the country at the 38th parallel, with the Soviet Union occupying the north, the U.S. occupying the south. I mean, the Soviets didn't want to go along with that voting plan at the UN. It was forced upon them by the U.S. And the North, the DPRK, was controlled by Kim Il-sung and by the Korean people, who were very explicit. And even if you look at internal documents from the country and letters written by Kim Il-sung at the time, they were very explicit that they were not puppets of the Soviets, that they were creating their own kind of government. They just had support from China and the Soviets. And they've maintained that to this day. They've maintained an independent and sovereign stance, even in relation to China and the Soviet Union. Like, we're not going to do just whatever you guys want. Whereas the U.S. fascist puppet dictatorship in South Korea, run by Syngman Rhee, was just that. It was a puppet dictatorship of the U.S. So again, to conflate what the Soviets were doing with what the Americans were doing is just stupidity. And it's gross because you're distorting the history and the revolutionary struggle of these people. You're distorting Korean culture and Korean history, which the U.S. has done everything it can to destroy for the last 70 years. Soviet-backed Korean People's Democratic Republic established the DPRK in the north with Kim Il-sung as its leader. You'd think Stalin would be its leader. The southern half of the peninsula became the Republic of Korea, which was established under the leadership of fascist dictator Syngman Rhee, a U.S.-backed politician who graduated from Stanford. And they just plopped him in Korea, and they're like, here's your president now. Whereas Kim Il-sung rose from the masses as a democratically elected leader of Korea. So who's more democratic here? The Soviet-backed Kim Il-sung, the leader who fought and led the anti-colonial struggle against Japan before being chosen as the leader by his people, or this fascist dictator who graduated from U.S. universities and then was plopped in South Korea and declared the president by the West? Yeah, these are the same thing for sure. The division of Korea into two separate states was meant to be temporary, of course, but efforts to reunify the country failed, leading to the establishment of two separate and ideologically opposed governments, which the U.S. would hold the North under stringent sanctions while doing everything they could to boost the bourgeoisie of the South. Kim Il-sung's government in the North became increasingly authoritarian and heavily influenced by Soviet-style communism, while Syngman Rhee's government in the South became an ally of the U.S. and embraced capitalism. Dude, even Wikipedia, even the most pro-U.S., pro-imperialist sources admit that Syngman Rhee was authoritarian too, a whole lot more than Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung's government became increasingly authoritarian, while Syngman Rhee just became an ally of the U.S. Yeah, and massacred all of the communists and all of the left-leaning people and anybody who was tied to Kim Il-sung or the North in any way. He just massacred anyone who disagreed with him, with the help of U.S. and with weapons paid for by U.S. tax dollars and the support of the Western military. Killed anyone who disagreed with him, banned opposition parties, banned opposition media. But it's not authoritarianism because he's backed by the U.S. It's only authoritarian if you're backed by the Soviet Union. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever read in my life. And why was Stalin a Zionist? I mean, Zionism was different back then, but and that was a mistake of the Soviet Union, but ultimately it was a thing where they felt like they were forced in the UN to recognize the national sovereignty of Israel because it was inevitable at that point. And, it was a tactical error. It was a mistake. And yeah, that's all it was. It was just a foreign policy mistake. And Zionism and the state of Israel hadn't quite evolved into what they were today. I mean, that might have been post-Nakba, though, when the Soviet Union actually voted for that. So 75% of Palestinian people had already been made refugees. Israel, with the help of the British, had already seized all that land. And the Soviets were like, okay, we'll recognize Israel within the UN because these are just the conditions that we have to deal with. Not something I like, but I also don't like China trading with Israel, right? China doesn't, they have a foreign policy and a trade policy of complete non-interventionism, which means they'll trade with anybody, including Israel. So, good question. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, triggering the Korean War. No, shut up. I'm done with this. Yeah. The North invaded the South because they tried to kick the U.S. out, who was occupying half the country and killing 20% of their population with bombs. So stupid, so silly, ChatGPT. All right, that was a really fun segment. That got us like 40 minutes of good content. But now I got to head out and get ready for wrestling practice, y'all, right as we have 112 viewers in the chat. Got to head out, unfortunately. But I'll try to come back tonight with Carlos if Carlos is around. Maybe he's still in Arkansas. I'm not sure. Hopefully we'll be able to do a stream. If not, I'll definitely smack a gaming stream tonight, so stay tuned for that. Follow our gaming channel that I'm going to pull up right now before I leave and get ready, even though I'm in a hurry. Eddie Liger Smith Gaming, or just follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/MidwesternMarks. Right now we're playing Final Fantasy, going through the game and giving a Marxist analysis of Final Fantasy X. We're going to tackle Final Fantasy 12 when we're done. Might start playing some strategy games, some games like Iron Hearts or like Victoria 3 that are based in history and strategy. So yeah, follow that if you're interested in gaming and you want to join the gamer revolution. Thank you, Penis Dragger, for the $2 super sticker before we head out. Great job with the username. I love it. I laugh every time. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Wish I could stay on for another hour. I'm feeling it today. I'm loving the stream. Loving all the support and interacting with y'all. But alas, I have to go get better at wrestling so I can represent communism in the Olympics. Hey, Noah. You going to tag in for me? Hey,
what's up? Sorry, I was fixing my speakers.
Oh, you're good. I was just heading out. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't.
Sorry.
I'm sorry I missed you.
I mean, do you want to
rush
take
home
over?
to
I'll
catch
tag
you.
you in.
I'm sorry. Okay, we can do that. Yeah, I was
Sure,
trying to rush home from work to catch you in time, and it looks like I missed you.
Dang it. Yeah, I was just leaving. I have wrestling at 4, so.
Oh, bummer.
If you want to stream tonight, I'm down, though.
Let's do it tonight instead, and this will just be like a surprise cameo.
Base. I love it. Yes. Say hi to Noah, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
All right. I gotta get going.
I can sit here and do something. Who's got some stuff for me to respond to?
Yeah, go for it. I'm just gonna leave the studio now. Have fun.
All right, brother. Have good fun at practice.
You bet.
Hey, everybody. What's up? I'm sorry I'm not Eddie. I'm not sure what he was talking about, but I like the title here, which is Steven Crowder's downfall. And what was the other part? Oh, Engels' origin of the family. Okay, let's talk about that one. Does anyone know what Eddie said about it? Am I too late to talk about that or what? Hi, everybody. Here, we'll say hi to Jay and Roles and No, whose name I really, really like, and Fred Edward and Ian and Jacob. Hi, everybody. Yeah, okay. Don't worry if you're late to the show, Ian. I'm also late to the show, so it's okay. This is maybe the first time I've done this on my own, and it'll help if I can see. Let's put on my glasses here. That helps. Okay. So, okay, great. Thank you, Kibble Hunch, who says he doesn't think he got to that. They're playing with ChatGPT, which I've done with my family in the past. It's fun. Let's talk about Engels then and origin of the family. Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State is one of my favorite books in the entire Marxist canon, like the entire thing. It describes exactly what it says, right? The arising of the bourgeois family, of what property is and how it became what it is, and the state as, and this is my favorite part, the sort of apparatus that arises out of the irreconcilable contradiction between the classes. That means that the classes are, what's good for one is bad for the other, right? So this contradiction is objective. It takes the form of a constant back and forth, one or the other, based on that private property, right? So the state arises in order to sort of mediate this and gives the illusion of being above class altogether. But what Engels explains is that it is always the state of a particular ruling class, right? And as this state develops, it then hits a point where it undevelops, and the progressive class within that society begins organizing in a way to overcome that and produce its own state and its own class interests. So I really like that one. He also gets into the women question in that, which is really good, and gets into a problem that I think a lot of people have when they refer to class. And this sort of goes into the mistakes of intersectionality and other bourgeois theories that try to address real issues within society, but fail because of the bourgeois ideology. So what intersectionality would say is that, someone can be oppressed as a woman, as a Black woman, as a disabled Black woman, and these are all separate things, right? And they intersect with each other in this one individual person. But what Marxism does is it takes these and expands it into class analysis. And this is where Marxism gets so dynamic, because what Marxism observes is that this woman's struggle, the struggle of women altogether to overcome patriarchy, right, is a concrete form of class struggle that is created by the material history all around it, right? So as men sort of developed into an oppressive class in regard to women, it creates this class struggle. And in our modern bourgeois society, the struggle of women for equality is a form of class struggle. It's working class women against a particular ruling class, meaning against, if we remember the other part, the state itself, because the state is a state of a particular ruling class. I also see a question here. Can Noah talk about Israel and Stalin? Noah can always talk about Stalin. Stalin's sort of a hero of mine. Sorry, I just got home from work and I had an exhausting day, so I'm going to be drinking a lot of coffee. And we could talk about Israel too, but I think Stalin's a bit of a more interesting topic. Israel's kind of talked to death and it's very straightforward, but Stalin, my dad had a saying. He used to say that in every situation, there is a Stalin line to walk. And what that means is the line between the two poles, right? So Stalin was very famous for being able to expertly weave a solution between rural and urban, right? Between peasantry and proletariat. The whole 36th Constitution empowered the peasantry, which was the majority of Soviet society at the time, right? And so the Stalin line in this situation was to create the solution, and he did this through a sort of grassroots campaign that the state backed up. And I'm losing my train of thought. I apologize. It's been a long day. And anyway, the 36th Constitution took this old form of the dictatorship of the proletariat and really expanded it. And that was what was so great and democratic about that. Let's see, there's a few more questions about Stalin there. Mixed in there is, hey Noah, do you still have your Hofner violin bass? It's back there somewhere. Yeah, can you see it? There it is. Right under the Midwestern Marx banner. Let's see, what else? Stalin is so amazing. Stalin wasn't exactly a Zionist. There was a really big Jewish labor bund in the Soviet Union, and that's a huge bag of bananas that we do not have time to get into right now. That would take hours. Oh, here's a good one. Stalin killed most of the real Bolsheviks. Interesting, right? This is something you hear from Trotskyists a lot, that the Moscow trials were Stalin taking out all the old Bolsheviks because he was evil and wanted to consolidate power for himself and be a dictator, and he would eat their babies for disagreeing with them, and then he'd get their babies and eat those babies, and then the babies of those babies, he'd eat those babies just because he liked power a lot, which is not true, right? Now let's think about this though, whether Stalin eliminated old Bolsheviks or acted dynamically in the moment to address real problems that rose up. As the revolution sort of formed right before it took power, the Bolsheviks experienced a massive wave of support because they were really the only party standing against the war. And this won their support in the peasantry, sort of away from the left SRs, which were losing support anyway because they had split right into the left and right SRs. And so originally the Bolsheviks are trying to ally with the left SRs. That doesn't really work out. And a whole bunch of people joined the party, right? And they had a lot of party recruitment drives and stuff like that. So just because someone was a Bolshevik doesn't necessarily mean they were a good communist. It also doesn't mean that they continued being a good communist all the way through. Trotsky, for example, was never a really good communist. He was always what Lenin called a flopping fish, right? Sort of a political opportunist. But then you have people like Bukharin, who began as very promising theorists, and because of the just political realities in a life or death revolutionary situation like that, made some really bad choices, ended up with some bad political allies, and pushed into corners, and ended up committing treason along with Trotsky, right? And so what they did was they tried to correct this with political education. That was Stalin's plan. That's what the short course was supposed to address, which is a famous book they printed in the Soviet Union, which had a sort of short history, a short description of what dialectical and historical materialism are, that kind of stuff. And what they wanted, what Stalin wanted, was to have mandatory education of all party officials. Clearly, that was not supported. Just like in our day, the people who don't think Marxism itself is important or are there for the wrong reasons, they stand against education, which is why you find people pushing against Midwestern Marxism, people like us, because we are educate all the time, right? And so eventually Stalin's big programs got defeated, and this leads to all the problems that happened later on in the Soviet Union. It got to a point where the education level was so low that whoever could make it seem as if they were agreeing with something Lenin wrote won any debate, right? Which lends itself towards dogmatism and political machinations that aren't honest. And it leads us away from being able to do our own analysis. And that is the problem that we have in the US right now. Because of all the distortions in our last period of history, People don't know how to do a Marxist analysis, right? What we do instead is we learn the way we're taught to learn in our bourgeois schools and our education. We're taught to memorize conclusions. Just like we memorize answers for tests, we memorize dates and specific figures, and the focus is not on really learning and understanding. And when the focus is on learning and understanding, that's when Marxism itself can flourish, right? Excuse me, I need more coffee. I'm gonna run out soon. So yeah, the Moscow trials, to get back to the original subject, sorry, I had to close something, ended up being a whole bunch of very high-ranking party and military officials conspiring to commit treason right before the Nazis were set to invade, right? And this is incredibly dangerous. The sort of narrative that they were show trials and, you know, all the confessions were all forced and blah, blah, blah. It really doesn't have any evidence behind it whatsoever. In fact, even American observers at the time and the U.S. ruling class has never been a big fan of the Soviet Union, as we all know. Even the American observers said that everything in those trials was on the level and they had a very fair and just legal system. So I think that's really important to remember. And it's also important to remember that what do you want them to do, right? Like, let's put ourselves in Stalin's shoes. He's given intelligence, very, very reliable intelligence from his top people. Excuse me. From his top people, that high-ranking generals, party theorists, and other officials are committing treason, conspiring to overthrow the Central Committee and put themselves in power. This is happening at a time when the Nazis are about to invade. To arrest those people and get them into a trial and publicize the trial so that people see what's happening, that's really the only solution you have. What are you going to let them take over and let the entire Soviet Union be at risk for exactly what every Western analyst was saying at the time, being exterminated by the Nazis? No, you'd have to be insane to do something like that. And so, like most narratives around the Stalin Soviet Union, what they do is they take facts and they twist them up to make it seem as if, you know, these were evil people doing evil things and eating babies and all the rest, instead of people who were just doing what they could with what they had, which was very, very little. Looks like we got a super sticker from Pennis Trager, who has the best thing. I don't know how to click that. I'm sorry, I'm the old one without any technology experience, I guess. So yeah, but thank you, Pennis Trager, and I love your name, and you are great. So what else can we talk about here? I think I got a little bit more time. I want to get a little rest if Eddie and I are going to stream again later, though. I'm sort of going through the chat here. There's all kinds of great information in here. Ian talks about the German ambassador to Czechoslovakia confirmed that there were plots in the USSR against Stalin in the 30s. His notes to Hitler were published in 1985. Thanks for adding that. I think it's interesting because all these things, they come out, but what gets publicized and what gets marginalized? The importance of that, I think, is really how we need to focus on how propaganda works in our era, right? And this is what actually Eddie and I were talking about maybe doing a stream on the Twitter files. This is how the Twitter files are sort of exposing how modern propaganda works. What they do is boost narratives they want to have out there, want people to hear, and then they'll marginalize or even completely silence anything that is inconvenient for the ruling class. And it puts us in an odd position because Elon Musk, right? Not a great guy, horrible bourgeois sort of guy, rich kid who fell into his father's emerald mine, right? Is responsible for beginning this Twitter files thing. And you notice the Twitter files aren't publicized in any of their media. It's all over Twitter, but look at any other social media, not there, right? And the Twitter files will tell you why. And there are direct requests from the FBI, Homeland Security, the DSA, the State Department, the Democrats, the Republicans, etc., to silence certain things. And it's wild the way it happens. And look, I'm not like a huge fan of Matt Taibbi. He's kind of liberal, right? But they brought him before a modern day House Un-American Activities Committee investigation and started really in a really sleazy way trying to paint him as something he wasn't. And what he is just a progressive liberal journalist, right? They're trying to paint him as trying to lie and be in league with Russia or Trump or whatever else they said, which is silly because he wrote a book calling Trump what was it, like an insane clown president, I think. So yeah, the Twitter files are huge. I'll say that much. And I think it will be worth everybody's time to check them out. So let's do this for a little bit before I gotta go. Let's turn this into a little bit of an AMA, and somebody could maybe get me a video to react to. I saw it. Jacob posted something earlier, but it's way up there and I lost it. So I apologize. I don't want to have dead air, while I scroll through. Here's the first question for AMA, right? Doug Jeffrey says, "Hey Noah, does streaming by yourself feel like talking to yourself?" Yes, it absolutely does. Eddie's a master at being able to seem natural while doing this, and I have all the respect in the world for how good he is at it. It's hard. It's very weird to talk about. Oh, Orange N64 says, "Cover the Maoists in India." There's many different Maoist groups in India. The most famous one that people talk about in the West are the Naxalites. And they're a really controversial subject. The Naxalites they're very ultra, right? And began waging a war. They attacked other communist groups. They're officially against all of our allies in our communist movement here, who are CPIM and the Socialist Unity Center, the Communist in Power in Kerala, things like that. So I can't really comment much on their theory as I've never read any of it, but I do know the sort of ins and outs of them murdering people and stuff like that, and it just doesn't seem conducive to improving the material well-being of the people there. I wish I knew how to get this link that Jacob posted. I tried, and it's let's see, it doesn't work. Okay, but there is a description of it, so we'll read that real quick, and maybe I could search it on YouTube, right? Says, "Hey Noah, get a load of this anti-communist propaganda by YouTube American quote historian named Mr. Beat, entitled 'Who Killed More, Mao, Stalin, or Hitler?' Is absolute garbage, basically." Okay, so I don't even need to watch this. It's funny when they talk about all of the deaths and the death rates and Stalin eating all the babies and whatever. all the numbers keep changing. And if you actually look at the numbers and then compare them to census data, right, you'll see that sometimes it exceeds the population at the time, right? So when you talk about Stalin having killed 80 million people, that's more than the amount of people that were even alive back then. It's wild what they can get away with because nobody checks them. And this was Trotsky's sort of MO. He said so many contradictory things because nobody checked what he said, right? He'll describe something from an article he supposedly read in Pravda. And if you look up the actual article, it's nothing like what he said it was. And this is how so much anti-communist propaganda works. It strikes me as weird that his technique is exactly the same technique as British intelligence and American intelligence, though, right? So yeah, it all goes back to the Black Book of Communism, which I'm sure anyone watching this stream knows about because you guys are all awesome and know your stuff. And it goes back to British intelligence agents like Robert Conquest, who, if you look for primary sources from him, you'll never find any. The Black Book of Communism is kind of funny because even its own authors distance themselves from it, right? They said that the main author was just obsessed with saying that there were 100 million deaths. So he was purposely flubbing math. There are remedial math errors like decimal points in wrong places. He counts Nazis that were invading the Soviet Union. He counts babies that he said should have been conceived but weren't because it was wartime. Just this wild stuff. And people don't check. All you got to do is check. And this is like, people ask me all the time, like, how I convert so many libertarians or get them to just be open to the idea of class struggle and the power of the people rather than some ideological line, right? And I talk to them about their media skepticism, right? They are all about how the media lies about Trump, etc. And I say, well, why can't you apply that to anything else, right? If they will lie about Trump, who is within their class, right, and still did a bunch of what they wanted him to do, if they lie about him, what do you think they would do to their main geopolitical enemies? Of course they're going to lie about him. And every time, I have never, ever gotten a negative response. Never, ever. It's always, I've never thought about it like that. Or it looks like I got to do some research, stuff like that. Thank you to Sam Dixon for the $5. He says, I would love to see a crowd-funded, peer-reviewed, and academic Black Book of Capitalism, a legitimate book that can be sourced and appealed to honestly. That is a fantastic idea. And if you're into writing, I do know a Marxist publishing house with great editors. Well, some great editors, one horrible editor that talks like broken glass when it smokes cigarettes. That's me. So yeah, Black Book of Communism, not good, right? What else? What else can we talk about? I'm actually going to go soon. I apologize for kind of giving you guys a hit and run here, but I tried to make it home in time, stream with Eddie, and I got to do dinner with the wife, so gonna go do that soon. But before that, I want to discuss. People have been asking me about this a lot lately. I'm very close to publishing a new paper, which is going to be on a theoretical innovation of my own that we call reproletarianization. So I want to kind of just give you guys a basic outline and preview of that. Reproletarianization is a process that I'm claiming is happening now within what we can look at as the higher stage of imperialism, right? In 2008, we turned a corner economically. where the productive economy officially got sidestepped, and most capital became financial. So this is our sort of move into full financialization. And there's a whole host of reasons this affects the working class, which I will let economists like Radhika Desai and Michael Hudson explain to you. And by the way, check out their new show together. It's amazing. And they'll explain this financialization process in detail. Where I come in is the dialectical view of this in relation to class society. So during the last period of our history, tons of working class people, proletarian people, sort of lost their proletarian character. And due to the technological revolution, we had a big proliferation of the professional classes. So we had these big middle classes arise, right? Then we have the political revolution we call the civil rights movement. And for the first time in history, people of color are legally able to enter those middle classes, which is also huge. That also puts us a step closer to sort of actualization as a people, as a full people, as the American people, right? No longer legally kept separate from each other. That's gigantic. And it's created a lot of positive things in our society. But to get back to now and full financialization, what this does is it drives the living standards of what we call the reproletariat back down to before the rise of the middle classes, right? So you got this giant section of people looking backwards at, a happy life in the suburbs and forwards at low-wage service labor that they're sort of forced into because of that technological leap, right? And what that meant for globalization. And this causes deindustrialization here, right? So they're being reproletarianized in a sense where they're back down to the level of the original proletariat in that they're kept unstable and unable to do anything other than reproduce the relations of society. Now, here's the difference. They don't stand in contradiction to industrial capital like us in the proletariat do, right? They stand in contradiction to finance capital, which now is primary. So it's quickly becoming this big, major contradiction that I really think the left is sort of not focused on because of all the distortions of the last period. So what I see happening is being able to first organize a proletariat again, right? And then create a sort of worker-peasant alliance with the reproletariat in the form of rent organization, right? And what I mean by rent is not, just your apartment or whatever, though homeownership is a big part of this. I mean economic rents. I mean interest. I mean loans and debt, et cetera, et cetera. And Doug Jaffray asked a question, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, that I think that kind of solved. What path do you think the transitionary phase out of capitalism would look like in the U.S.? Well, we have to use an NEP style system. I think the first question isn't sort of to imagine economic systems like that. Those are going to arise as sort of organically, right? They're going to be what they are as we address the problems of the day. And so the problem of our day now is to organize ourselves in order to save society, because our ruling class is marching us towards a nuclear war. And that is fucking terrifying, right? They are more willing to engage in the total annihilation of mankind than they are, or humankind, than they are to let go of power, right? And so we really need to organize now like never before. And we are beginning to do that, right? If you look around, you're seeing radicalization and the understanding that we can't continue on in the old way like never before in my lifetime, at least. it really makes me optimistic. I see all these young people getting involved and getting active, and that really inspires me. I was very nihilistic for a long time. I mean, I was involved back in the day, and people like Carlos and Eddie coming out of the Bernie movement and being able to see through it and learn these things that took me years just so quickly and being spot on, that's inspiring for me. That gets me thinking, well, I have something to offer, and what am I doing with it, right? I'm sitting on my ass. So it sort of gives me a sense of duty to the people, to our people, to do what I can to help. So that's what I'm doing. I have one more big announcement, guys. Starting not today, obviously, but next Tuesday, we're going to be doing our first ever Marxism school. This is something we've had being planned for months and months and months. Finally, we got it together. We're going to be able to actually pull it off. We want to be able to give different courses at different times, and this is going to be a live streamed class that you guys will be able to be involved in. Have a teacher there to teach you the coursework and the reading and read right along with you. I'm going to be doing the first one. It's called Basics of Marxism, and it's to sort of teach us how to do our own Marxist analysis. If you remember a little bit ago, I was talking about the dogmatism that comes from not being able to do that. So let's learn how to do it, right? We're going to be offering the class to Patreon supporters first. So I'm going to be actually, right after I eat, going and putting that on there. There'll be a sign-up sheet, and the class will be about 30 people, hopefully. And if not enough people sign up on Patreon, we'll open it up to everybody, but we want to give them a chance. Since they support the Institute and we couldn't do it without them, we want to give them first crack at it. But either way, it'll be live streamed. The videos will be there forever. So yeah, the first one's called Basics of Marxism. And if anyone's familiar with our friends at the Revolutionary Blackout Network, JB is going to be involved in the class and live streaming it himself. So that should be really, really fun. I can't wait to start that. Other than that, I'm looking forward to hopefully coming back a little bit later tonight when Eddie gets back. And that'll wrap it up for the day. Thank you guys so much for interacting with me and giving me good questions. It's my first time doing this on my own, really. So you guys made it awesome. Sam Dixon asked if he can get a link for the class. There's going to be a sign-up sheet on our Patreon. After that, we'll put it on all our social media, so don't worry about that. It's just not there quite yet. This actually might be the first time I sort of announced the official date on social media at all. So, yeah. Thank you, Andrew, who said I did great. I don't know. Great's a big word. But, yeah, I had a lot of fun. Thank you all again, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.